So we're diving into a truly pivotal moment in history today.
Absolutely.
When the U.S. decided to use atomic weapons against Japan, trying to force a quick end to World War II, there's this question that just jumps out.
Right.
Why wasn't Tokyo, the capital, the biggest city, the nerve center, why wasn't that the main target?
Yeah, it seems like the most obvious choice, doesn't it? Like, if you have this ultimate weapon, you'd aim for the heart.
Exactly. It feels like overlooking the bullseye. And that basic curiosity, why not Tokyo? That's what we really want to unpack today.
Definitely. And it's a decision wrapped in layers of complexity. It goes way beyond just pure military thinking. So our mission here, kind of drawing from this animated documentary transcript we looked at, is to get a handle on the reasons Hiroshima and Nagasaki were chosen.
And crucially, why Tokyo got a pass, so to speak.
Precisely. Because that first assumption, like you said, is always the biggest city. Let's dig into why that logic didn't apply here.
Okay. So the main goal for the U.S., the absolute core objective for using the bomb, was forcing a Japanese surrender, like immediately.
Plain and simple.
Because the forecasts for a ground invasion, landing troops on the Japanese mainland, they were just horrifying. We're talking potentially hundreds of thousands of American lives lost.
Unbelievable numbers. And this new weapon was seen as the way, maybe the only way, to avoid that terrible cost.
Right. But the U.S. wasn't entirely acting solo here, were they? There was an agreement involved.
That's right. You've got the 1943 Quebec Agreement. It basically said the U.S. needed British consent, which covered Britain and Canada before using atomic weapons.
And according to the transcript,
that consent was given. Pretty readily, it seems. So that hurdle was cleared, setting the stage for, okay, where do we actually drop this thing?
And Tokyo naturally must have been on the initial list. It's the capital.
Of course, it had to be considered. But it seems it was taken off the list relatively quickly.
Why were the big reasons?
Well, the transcript points to a few key things.
Right.
First, there was this very practical concern about decapitating the leadership.
Meaning?
If your goal is surrender and you wipe out the entire government, the emperor, everyone with the authority to actually surrender, well, who's left to make the decision?
Right. You need someone to actually say, we give up.
Exactly. Destroying the central government could completely backfire. You might end up with, total chaos, maybe even more fragmented, prolonged resistance. The Allies needed some structure left to negotiate with.
Okay, that makes sense from a strategic endpoint perspective. What else?
Then there's the emperor. This was huge.
The transcript emphasizes this point.
Oh, absolutely. The Japanese position on protecting the emperor was, non-negotiable for them. The fear was if an atomic bomb killed the emperor and the imperial family.
It wouldn't break their will, it would ignite it.
Precisely. It could trigger an even more fanatical fight-to-the-death resistance. Fueled by this deep sense of outrage and, sacred duty, it would undermine the whole goal of ending the war fast.
A profound cultural and spiritual blow. Not just political.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
His position was unique. So preserving the possibility of the emperor ordering a surrender was actually seen as crucial for ending the war.
Interesting. Okay, so preserving leadership, the emperor issue. Any other factors for sparing Tokyo?
Yeah, there's a more pragmatic one, too. Tokyo had already been bombed. A lot.
Right, the firebombing raids were devastating.
Immensely devastating. So dropping an atomic bomb on a city already heavily damaged, already scarred, it might not have shown off the unique, terrifying power of this specific weapon as dramatically.
You mean compared to dropping it on a city that was relatively untouched?
Exactly. Part of the strategy was the psychological shock, the, oh my God, what is this factor? Seeing one bomb do that to a previously intact city was meant to have maximum impact.
Okay, so Tokyo's off the list. That leads to the alternatives. And this is where it gets really interesting, according to the source material. Kyoto.
Yeah, Kyoto. Japan's former imperial capital, incredibly important historically, culturally, and with a large population. The transcript indicates this actually became the preferred target.
Preferred? By who?
By the U.S. military leadership, and apparently even President Truman initially favored Kyoto.
Wow. That feels wrong somehow, given its cultural status. Why Kyoto? What was the thinking?
The rationale, it seems, was purely about psychological impact. The thinking was that destroying Kyoto, a place so central to Japan's identity and history, would deliver such a crushing blow to morale.
That it would break their will to fight.
That was the idea. Shatter their spirit, basically. Make them realize continuing the war was utterly hopeless.
But Kyoto wasn't bombed. It was saved. How?
down to one man, essentially, Secretary of War Henry Stimson.
What did he do?
Well, the transcript notes he had a personal connection. He'd actually visited Kyoto maybe more than once and really appreciated its cultural significance, its beauty.
So personal experience played a role.
It seems so, but also a broader strategic concern. He argued that destroying Kyoto would create deep, lasting bitterness. It might even, he worried, push post-war Japan towards seeking revenge, perhaps aligning with, say, the Soviet Union.
So looking beyond the immediate end of the war towards the future relationship.
Exactly. He saw it as potentially counterproductive in the long run. And he pushed hard, successfully demanding Kyoto be removed from the list.
Amazing. One person's intervention, based on cultural appreciation and geopolitical foresight, changed that specific decision.
It really highlights the complexities. So with Kyoto out, the focus shifted. The main options left were Hiroshima, Yokohama, Kokura, and a place called Yamagata.
And they landed on Hiroshima and Kokura initially. Why those two?
Hiroshima was a major military base, an important army headquarters and staging area. Kokura had large arsenals, significant weapons factories.
Okay, clear military value.
Yes, but also, crucially, as the transcript points out, both cities had been largely spared major bombing raids before.
Back to that point about demonstrating the bomb's power.
Precisely. Hitting relatively untouched cities would make the devastation undeniable. One bomb, one city obliterated. That was the intended message.
But Kokura wasn't the second city hit. We know it was Nagasaki. What happened with Kokura?
Weather. Simple as that, really.
Seriously?
Yeah. According to the transcript, on the day the mission was scheduled, Kokura was obscured. Thick clouds and also smoke from nearby factories, apparently.
So the bombardier couldn't get a clearer visual target?
Couldn't see the aiming point. After circling, trying to find a break, they had to make a decision.
Which was?
Proceed to the backup target.
And the backup was Nagasaki.
The backup was Nagasaki. And, well, shortly after Hiroshima and then Nagasaki were hit, Japan did announce its surrender.
Meaning no more atomic bombs were needed to achieve that original goal.
Correct. The objective, forcing surrender to avoid invasion, was met.
So recapping why Tokyo was spared, it really wasn't about it lacking importance. It was strategic calculation, wasn't it?
Absolutely. A mix of things. Needing leadership intact to actually order the surrender.
Avoiding total administrative chaos.
The critical factor of the emperor's survival to prevent even fiercer resistance.
And yeah, the fact that it was already so damaged, the bomb's unique impact wouldn't be as stark.
Right. And that stands in sharp contrast to why Hiroshima, a military center, and Kokura, the intended industrial target, were chosen. They were relatively untouched, perfect canvases, in a grim sense, to show the world this terrible new power.
All aimed at that goal.
Yeah.
End the war, stop the invasion.
That was the stated objective.
It really just hammers home how complex these wartime decisions are. You know, it's never just one single factor. It's military, political, cultural, even chance, like the weather.
Absolutely. Which leads to maybe a final thought for you to ponder.
Okay.
What if the clouds hadn't been over Kokura that day? What if Kokura had been the second city bombed instead of Nagasaki? How might things have unfolded differently, even slightly in those immediate post-war days, or even in the longer relationship?
Yeah, it's sobering. A powerful reminder of how history can turn on unpredictable moments and the immense weight of those decisions made under pressure.